Hello there, future doctors. Welcome back to the GCSE AQA Biology Lessons playlist from Best Medicine, and today we'll be continuing with the chapter Organization. So previously we have done the digestive system, and today we're going to be starting with yet another system called the cardiovascular system. It is also referred to as the circulatory system, which is involved in the circulation of blood. So, the cardiovascular system, or the circulatory system, cardio means heart and vascular means blood vessels, is the transport system which involves the use of heart and blood vessels to pump blood throughout the body. Well, before beginning this, we need to understand, why do we need a transport system? Why do we need a transport system? Well, number one, we have to deliver oxygen, nutrients, and hormones throughout the body. So we need a transport system to do that. Number two, we want to remove any waste products like carbon dioxide and urea from cells and tissues. Number three, we want to regulate the internal environment. So we want to coordinate physiological processes and homeostasis, including metabolism, heat distribution, and immune responses, and for overall health. And that is why we need a cardiovascular system. We need a transport system. Also, because we humans are multicellular organisms, we do not, diffusion is just not sufficient enough to meet all the metabolic demands of our cells. So we need a transport system to be able to deliver nutrients effectively to all the cells in the body. Now, there are two transport systems in the body. Number one, we've got the cardiovascular system that we'll be talking about, and the other one is the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is not part of AQA, but a little bit of a mention of this was done in the digestive system chapter when we were talking about small intestines having villi, and when the small intestines, lipases break down lipids into fatty acids and glycerol, then those fatty acids and glycerol, they enter into the lymphatics instead of the blood. And that's the lymphatic system, but it's not part of AQA, so we're not going to go into the details of this. Now, the cardiovascular system, the circulatory system, is also referred to as the double circulatory system. Circulatory comes from the word circuit. Do you know what a circuit is? A circuit is a loop, right? That starts from a point and then it finishes at that particular point. So a circuit is a loop, and when you say double circulatory system, then essentially what you're talking about is that you've got two circuits, two loops that separately pump blood into circuits. So these involve the pulmonary circulation, which sends oxygen, poor blood, from the heart to the lungs for oxygenation, and systemic circulation, which distributes oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the body tissues for nutrient delivery. So the way it works is that you will have essentially the lungs, right? So a lung kind of looks like this, right? That's one lung, and that's another lung. And then you've got the heart here. I'm just going to draw a square for the heart. Now, one thing that the heart is doing is that it is pumping this blood to the lungs. Okay? It's pumping this blood to the lungs. Now, what's happening in the lungs is that the blood is getting oxygenated, and once it gets oxygenated, it's going to come back from the lungs in blood vessels back to the heart. So that is one loop, right? You start from the heart, you go to the lungs, and from the lungs you come back to the heart. That is one loop. The other loop is that you've got the heart, which is pumping the blood to the rest of the body. So let's make an oval here that represents the rest of the body, like the brain and the muscles and the digestive system and the urinary system and so on. And so you want the oxygenated blood to go into the body. The heart is going to do that. The heart pumps blood to the body, right? Oxygenated blood, and that oxygenated blood is used, its oxygen is used, and carbon dioxide would enter into the blood, and it will become deoxygenated, and that is returned to the heart so that it can be sent to the lungs again. So that is the other loop, right? These are two loops. So the top loop is the pulmonary. Pulmonary is a word that we use for lungs, pulmonary circuit. For example, in hospitals, a pulmonologist is a lung doctor. And this one is because it's going to the systems of the body. We call it the systemic circuit. Okay, systemic circuit. So again, the transport system of the human body is a double circulatory system because it contains two circuits, the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. And they can ask you this, right? They can ask you in the exam, why is the transport system, the circulatory system, referred to as a double circulatory system? And for that, I hope that you guys can write this answer and get full marks. So the cardiovascular system, as the name suggests, cardio means heart. Anything related to cardio is heart. A cardiologist, for example, right, is a heart doctor. And vascular means vessels. In this case, that would be the blood vessels. Cardiovascular system is made up of blood, of course, that's the medium, heart, which is the pump, arteries, capillaries, and veins, which are the vessels. So to be able to deliver materials the way these organs, such as the blood, the heart, the arteries, the capillaries, and the veins would work together, will be explained down here. So basically what you have is the heart, right? And the heart is the pump that is pumping blood to different parts of the body. So the heart pumps blood. It pumps oxygenated blood containing all the nutrients and oxygen into towards tissues, right? Remember, tissues are groups of cells, and these are groups of respiring cells that are able to take in the oxygen and glucose and use them for aerobic respiration. So this tissue could be a liver tissue, or muscle tissue, or brain tissue, whatever it is. What essentially it's receiving is oxygenated blood coming in through an artery. So here is an artery that is coming from the heart, bringing oxygenated blood to the tissue. So this oxygenated blood would be rich in oxygen, right? So this would be rich in oxygen, poor in CO2, and rich in glucose. And that's oxygenated blood. So when the artery brings blood to the tissues, the artery splits into smaller blood vessels called capillaries, okay? The artery is just gonna split into very small and thin blood vessels that are adapted for gas as well as for other materials exchange. And these are called capillaries. So capillaries, it's essentially the capillaries that supply the oxygenated blood to the tissues, and it is the capillaries in which the exchange of materials would occur. So when the oxygenated blood goes into the capillaries to the tissues, oxygen leaves, right? Oxygen is going to leave, and glucose is going to leave the oxygenated blood. What about carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide will be is released as a product of respiration, right? It's a waste product. So CO2, which is a waste product, and water, which is also a waste product of aerobic respiration. You could also have other waste products such as urea, if you're talking about liver cells. You could also have something called creatine. All these are waste products, and they will go back into the blood. So eventually, once the blood becomes deoxygenated, it is collected into another type of blood vessels. So these capillaries will merge, and they form another type of blood vessels that will take the deoxygenated blood that is poor in oxygen and rich in CO2, and that's deoxygenated blood. This particular blood vessel is called a vein. So generally, veins would carry deoxygenated blood towards the heart, right? While arteries, they carry blood that is oxygenated away from the heart, okay? Now, to be able to understand the circulatory system, the cardiovascular system chapter in detail, we first need to understand the medium that we are delivering, right? The medium through which all of this transport is occurring. And the medium essentially is blood. So what is blood made up of? Well, blood is made up of four most important things. Number one, we've got the red blood cells. Number two, we've got the white blood cells. Number three, we've got the platelets. And component number four is the watery fluid of the blood, that is the plasma. Okay, so let's have a look at blood. So blood would have, firstly, the red blood cells. Red blood cells are cells in the blood that help carry oxygen. These are the ones that help transport oxygen as well as a little bit of carbon dioxide as well. Now, red blood cells kind of look like this from the side, and from the top, they will look kind of like this. Okay, that is the top view of a red blood cell. So from the side, as you can see here, it kind of looks like a disc shape, right? A very flat cell. It's not spherical, but rather it's a flat cell. And you have this indentation on it from the top and the bottom. That kind of gives it this concave appearance on the top and the bottom, and therefore we call the red blood cell to have a biconcave shape, or biconcave disc shape, because it looks like a disc, very flat, and it's biconcave from the top and the bottom. So, what does the red blood cell contain? Number one, it contains a red-colored pigment that contains iron, and that pigment is called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is able to bind to oxygen, and therefore hemoglobin is the one that helps transport the oxygen. Okay? Then we got the nucleus. The red blood cell has no nucleus. It also does not have any other large organelles, such as a mitochondria. Because it doesn't have these organelles, this feature increases the volume that is available for hemoglobin, and therefore an increased volume available for oxygen to bind. Number three, it's got the biconcave disc shape, which increases surface area to volume ratio for faster exchange. Remember, the flatter you are, the higher the surface area to volume ratio, which would increase the diffusion and increase the transport. Flexible. Red blood cells happen to be very flexible. This gives them the ability to pass through the narrowest of capillaries in the body. Let me just quickly explain this. So for example, if you have an arteriole, which is a small artery, then red blood cells usually don't have any problems traveling through it because it's quite large, and red blood cells should not have any problems going through it. But if you have a narrow capillary, right, a little bit narrower here, then the red blood cells will have to squeeze in through this. And they are able to do so because these are flexible. So they will bend their shape, right, and still be able to pass through a very narrow capillary. So that's another adaptation. And there's a disease called sickle cell disease, in which the red blood cells, they lose their flexibility. So if they lose their flexibility, you would kind of imagine that they would pile up in capillaries and block them, right? And that causes a lot of pain and stuff. Now, next up, we have white blood cells. White blood cells are cells in the blood that help form the immune system. So these are the cells that help protect us from diseases. Now, in your books, especially in the Oxford syllabus books for AQA and so on, they just throw these words at you like leukocytes and B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes and blah blah blah, and they don't actually explain to you how these work and how they're linked together and what kind of features that they have, etc. So today we're gonna try to break everything down and try to understand all the new words, all the fancy words, and what do they even mean, right? What kind of cells are they? So let's go ahead and try to break it down on the right side. So I'm gonna be writing a lot, drawing some diagrams, and if you have purchased the notes, then I would really appreciate if you could also annotate after I teach you, okay? So first of all, we have to understand where these blood cells essentially are coming from in the first place. Well, all blood cells, like red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets, where they come from is actually the bone marrow, okay? The bone marrow. The bone marrow contains adult stem cells. Remember adult stem cells that only form a couple of different types of cells? Well, one kind of adult stem cells are present in the bone marrow. And these adult stem cells, they can form for you red blood cells, right, RBCs. They can also help you form white blood cells. White blood cells are also called leukocytes. L-E-U-K-O. Leuko means white. Cytes means cells. Cytes. Leukocytes. RBCs are also called erythrocytes. And adult stem cells would also give you platelets, right? So they will also give you platelets. And platelets are also called thrombocytes. So our topic right now is leukocytes. What happens here? Well, when the bone marrow, adult stem cells, give some white blood cells, the white blood cells can be of different types. They can either be phagocytes, so you can divide this into two major types. Number one, you would have phagocytes. What are phagocytes and how do they work? Well, phagocytes, what they do is they are able to eat up the germ, eat up the pathogen, and swallow it and digest it in their cytoplasm. So what I mean by this is that you could have a white blood cell, let's say here's a white blood cell, right? And then here's Mr. White blood cell, and then he's very angry all the time, right? Because he's always looking out for these pathogens. So if a very innocent pathogen, right, tries to creep by, well, this particular white blood cell is going to recognize the antigens, which are the identification tags on top of the pathogen, and it's going to recognize that these antigens, which are, again, identification tags on the cell membrane of different cells. Antigens can either be self or foreign, and this white blood cell will recognize that these are foreign antigens, right? Kind of like having a foreign passport, not from the UK. So similarly here, if we have a foreign antigen containing cell, maybe a bacteria coming into the body. So this gets angry, right? The phagocyte gets angry, and what it does is that it extends its cell membrane and its cytoplasm, right, and tries to engulf, tries to eat the bacteria, and eventually it succeeds in doing so. And what you will have is a white blood cell, right, which has engulfed in a vesicle the bacteria. Now, after doing so, what happens is that this particular white blood cell has digestive enzymes in another type of vesicles called lysosomes. So these are vesicles called lysosomes. And these lysosomes contain hydrolytic enzymes, digestive enzymes. The lysosomes will come and fuse with the vesicle containing the bacteria, and they will deposit their hydrolytic enzymes here, digesting and breaking down the bacteria. So this particular mechanism of eating, engulfing a pathogen, and then hydrolyzing it using digestive enzymes from lysosomes is called phagocytosis, okay? Phagocytosis. Phagocytosis, that's the word that we use for engulfing a bacteria and hydrolyzing it, digesting it. And that is done by phagocytes. So one kind of leukocytes are phagocytes, which are able to do phagocytosis. The other type of leukocytes, the other type of white blood cells, are lymphocytes. And lymphocytes need a little bit more detail into them, okay? So lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are the other type of white blood cells. And lymphocytes are of two types as well. Lymphocytes, you can have B lymphocytes. Very important for AQA. You need to understand this very well, okay? I hope you guys are annotating this. So lymphocytes can be B lymphocytes, or lymphocytes can be T lymphocytes. T lymphocytes. Okay? Let's talk about B lymphocytes first. So B lymphocytes, what they're supposed to do is to make antibodies. So B lymphocytes, here's a B lymphocyte, and if it interacts with a pathogen like a virus, for example, coronavirus, right? Recently we had this COVID epidemic. Well, if a coronavirus, for example, comes in, or any other virus or a bacteria comes in to the B lymphocyte will first react to the antigens, and it will say, okay, these are foreign antigens, right? But because this is a first infection that we're talking about, right, if it comes for the first time, the first response, right, it will take some time, so this is going to be a slow response. Slowly, what the B cell does, the B lymphocyte does, is that it differentiates into two different kinds of cells. Remember differentiation, right? So it will differentiate into two different kinds of cells. One of them is called a plasma cell, and the other is called the memory cell. So the plasma cell, which is the important one for active immunity, what it does is that it starts secreting these proteins called antibodies. Okay, these are Y-shaped proteins called antibodies, and they help destroy the pathogen, destroy the toxins, right, and also help in recognizing the pathogen by other white blood cells. So antibodies are secreted by plasma cells, which come from B lymphocytes. When B lymphocytes first encounter a pathogen, then very slowly, it takes some time for them to be able to do so, but very slowly they make some plasma cells that make antibodies that are complementary to the pathogen, and they also make some memory cells. So what is the function of the memory cell? Well, the memory cell stores the memory, the information of the pathogen, so that in case it comes again for the second time, then there's a faster response, right? So first response is slow, while the second response will be fast, because now we have memory cells, right? If you have memory cells now. An example of this would be COVID, right? For example, you get COVID, right, for the first time, and you haven't been vaccinated. It will take around 14 days for the COVID to eventually be eradicated from your body. But if you do have memory cells already, let's say you have gotten COVID before, maybe in the last 6 months, or maybe you have been vaccinated, then you'll have memory cells for it. And if you do have memory cells for it, then the response is going to be much, much faster. Why? Because if COVID comes again here, so here's a virus, right? Maybe it's coronavirus, maybe it's something else. It's coming here again, but this is the second infection, right? Second response. This is going to be very fast because memory cells will be able to detect them, and they will say, okay, this is the same pathogen. I'm familiar with this. So very quickly, whenever a memory cell identifies a pathogen it knows, it very quickly will divide and differentiate into plasma cells. Okay? Plasma cells. And more memory cells as well. So these plasma cells very quickly will start making those antibodies, which will help get rid of the pathogen or its toxins, and so on. So again, B lymphocytes are leukocytes that are able to make antibodies. When they first encounter a pathogen, the first response is slow, in which they differentiate slowly into plasma cells that will make antibodies and memory cells. If there's a second response to the same pathogen, then the memory cells will quickly come into action, and they will differentiate into plasma cells and more memory cells, but very quickly. So the second response is going to be fast. And this is really how vaccinations work. Vaccinations help train your B lymphocytes. They already give you a first response to the vaccine, so that when you get a real pathogen, you get a fast response, right? So for example, if you have been vaccinated against COVID, you might not even show symptoms at all for COVID, because you already have the memory cells, which very quickly respond against COVID. Then the other kind of lymphocytes, remember, so we started with leukocytes. Then leukocytes were of two types, phagocytes and lymphocytes. And then lymphocytes were of two types, B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. Now T lymphocytes are further divided into two types. Yep, you will have to remember all of them. One of them is very, very important. So T lymphocyte can either be T killer cells. That's very easy. Basically what they do is they help secrete toxins to kill infected cells. Okay, infected cells. So for example, if a cell is infected by a virus, a T killer cell will come in and destroy the body cell that has been infected. And cancer cells. The T killer cell also help get rid of cancer cells. And then we've got the T helper cells, and these are very, very important. And I'll tell you why. T helper cells. T helper cells, they help regulate all the other white blood cells, okay? All the white blood cells that we see here, T helper cells regulate their activities. You're ever sitting in a car and you see the traffic police, right? The traffic police is controlling where everything is going. Similarly, T helper cells, they help regulate the entire functions and activating, deactivating, stimulating different types of white blood cells. So T helper cells are influencing everything, all of immunity. Now, let's assume that you get rid of T helper cells. If you get rid of T helper cells, then you would not be able to regulate T killer cells, B lymphocytes, phagocytes all that much, right? The entire immune system will shut down. So that's very, very important. T helper cells are super important. Now here's the thing. T helper cells can be infected by human immunodeficiency virus, right? So what they do is they help regulate all other white blood cells, leukocytes. These can be infected by HIV. Can be infected by human immunodeficiency virus, covered in the communicable diseases chapter. Human immunodeficiency virus would essentially knock out T helper cells, and if these are gone, then the entire immune system will shut down. So you acquire an immunodeficiency syndrome, right, when you get HIV. So that is literally called acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, because you get it from HIV, in which the T helper cells are knocked down. Okay, so I hope you guys are annotating this, and that pretty much sums up our section on the white blood cells. One more thing that I want to mention here is that antibodies, what do they look like and how do they actually work? Well, antibodies, they kind of look like Y-shaped proteins, and they have these regions here which are complementary to different antigens of different bacteria. So they do a couple of things. One of them is agglutination. Agglutination, you can also remember this as clumping, right? Agglutination is clumping of different bacteria, for example. So if you have a bacteria here, and you have bacteria here, and another bacteria here, and so on, what the antibodies will do is that they will start binding to all of them, right, and help clump them together into these large areas so that they can be recognized by other white blood cells. Another thing that they do is that if you have a bacteria, let's say, right, and it's producing these toxins, so it's producing these red colored toxins, antibodies can come in and bind to these toxins, neutralizing them, okay? So they can also neutralize toxins. Another thing that antibodies can do is that they can help neutralize the movement of bacteria. So you have a bacteria and it has got that flagellum that is helping it to move. Antibodies can come in and bind to the flagellum, preventing it from moving. Okay? So when the bacteria is not able to move, then it's not able to infect the different cells. All right? Also, again, when they mark these these bacteria so that they can be swallowed by other white blood cells in phagocytosis, it has a name. You will not be tested about the name most probably, but the name is opsonization. Okay, so opsonization is when antibodies mark the bacteria to be swallowed, to be phagocytosed by phagocytes. Okay. And yeah, so that finishes this section on white blood cells. We get a meme. Doctors make money by curing people. White blood cells. You guys are getting paid. Okay, I have a research question for you guys, and this is a popular board question that comes up. So we just talked about HIV, right? And we said HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, infects T helper cells. So if T helper cells are gone, then all the other white blood cells cannot be regulated, and you get an acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So I want you guys to research this particular question. What kind of medicine do we most commonly use to treat HIV, right? This is a popular question. I've seen this on the board once as well. And next up we have platelets. Okay, so platelets are small fragments of cells. These are not true cells. These are small fragments of cells, again, made in the bone marrow by the adult stem cell. What they do is they recognize a site of injury in blood vessels and aggregate to form a plug. And then that plug is eventually solidified by a protein called fibrin into a clot. Not too much of information is present in AQA, at least. Other boards may have more information regarding this. And usually, I haven't seen a question yet on platelets. But it could possibly show up. So what is a platelet? How does it work? Well, here's a blood vessel, right? And remember that a blood vessel is made up of cells. So here's a cell, and then here's a cell, and then here's a cell, and so on. So let's say you get injured, right? If you get injured, then one of those cells can become damaged. Maybe you get damage here, right? Some damage here. So what would happen here is that if this part is damaged, the platelets that are hanging around in blood, so you've got this blood here that is going through the blood vessel, and you got the platelets in them, right? The platelets are going through the blood. They're able to recognize a structure that is not normal, right? They're able to recognize injuries inside blood vessels. And so as soon as they recognize that, okay, this part is a little bit injured, let's start gathering up here. They start gathering up here. Clumping here to block this area and prevent the blood from leaking out, right? Normally blood would just leak out, so you want to prevent this. And the platelets are going to come in, aggregate at the site of injury to prevent the blood from leaking out, forming a plug there, and that is called the platelet plug. Now, after this plug is formed, shortly afterwards, what would happen is that there is a fiber-like material that also comes from the blood, and that will help solidify this plug, and now you get a clot. So earlier we had a plug, and now it's a complete clot. A clot has been formed until the blood vessel regenerates and repairs itself by mitosis. So we get a meme for platelets. Removing the crust from your wound. Your blood platelets that have been working for days. Okay, so the next portion of blood is the plasma. Plasma is the watery part of the blood, okay? It is basically essentially the part which is a liquid, and it dissolves all the cells together, right? And dissolves all the other materials like glucose and amino acids and the other blood proteins, hormones, right? Everything else would be present inside the plasma. So plasma essentially is the water part of the blood. Now, it contains around 95% water, and everything dissolved, like amino acids, sugars, proteins, hormones, waste products, CO2, etc., will be present in plasma. Most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the blood in plasma, okay? And most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the form of hydrogen carbonate ions. We also call them more popularly as bicarbonate ions. So most of the CO2 is dissolved in the form of bicarbonate ions in the plasma until it reaches the lung. Now, one thing that you can do is you can do a blood centrifuge to try to see the components, percentages of blood. So you take a sample of blood, you put it in a test tube, and you centrifuge it. Right? You spin it and keep on spinning it, and eventually what will happen is that in the test tube, all the heavy stuff will accumulate at the bottom, right, and followed by lighter and the lightest stuff. So the heaviest stuff essentially are the red blood cells. The red blood cells would normally be around 45%, right? So they would form this 45% red area, and we call this red area as hematocrit, HCT. If you ever see like somebody's blood test where it says HCT is 45%, etc., HCT is referring to hematocrit, the amount of red blood cells. Then we've got around less than 1% is a whitish colored coat, and that contains the white blood cells and platelets. And then 55% of the blood is plasma normally, okay? Now, people who are sick, right, these things can go up or down. So you might want to remember these percentages because I will ask you a question on this, okay? A clinically related question in some future chapter. In the kidneys chapter. And next up we have blood vessels. So right now we have finished blood, which is the medium of the transport, and now we go into the blood vessels, which will help carry the blood around the body. Okay, so arteries are the first kind of blood vessels that we're going to do. Number one, arteries, they usually transport oxygenated blood, okay? They transport oxygenated blood, except the artery to the lungs, the artery that takes blood from the heart to the lungs, which is called the pulmonary artery. Remember, pulmonary is the word that we use for the lungs. Pulmonary artery takes deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs. All the other arteries transport oxygenated blood. Arteries have thick muscular walls, and the reason for this is because blood is coming at very high pressure, and you want to maintain that pressure so that the organs throughout the body can be efficiently supplied. So they have thick muscular walls for maintaining high pressure and directing blood flow. Arteries are also elastic. This is to be able to withstand pressure changes and maintain a continuous blood flow. They also have a narrow lumen, again to maintain high pressure and facilitate efficient oxygen and nutrient delivery to tissues. If the pressure drops too much, right, then the blood is not able to reach the organs all that much, which is not good. Secondly, we have veins. So veins, they contain blood that is low in oxygen. Generally, veins would transport deoxygenated blood, except pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein would be the vein that brings oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Veins have thinner walls compared to arteries, and veins also have valves. And valves are there to prevent backflow of blood and aid in venous return to the heart. Veins also have a larger lumen to accommodate slower flowing blood and reduced resistance. So let me show you how, on comparison, they would look like. So for example, if this is an artery, right, it has a narrow lumen, okay? A narrow lumen and a very thick muscular wall that is also very elastic, okay? A comparison to a vein has a wider lumen and a thinner wall, okay? And inside of the vein, you would also have these valves to be able to prevent backflow of blood. And the reason for this is because in veins, the blood is flowing at a very low pressure. So if it's flowing at a very low pressure, it has this tendency to eventually, sometimes due to gravity, fall back down. So blood is going like this at a very, very low pressure. Remember, arteries have a heart that is pumping the blood into them. Veins don't have a heart. This is just blood that is coming from tissues, and so it has a tendency to fall back down due to gravity. For example, if you have a person, right, and the person is standing, you could have a vein in his leg, right, and a vein in his leg is carrying this low pressure blood. The blood can start falling down if the person is standing, so that's not good. And to prevent the backflow of blood, veins have valves, okay? Veins have these valves, and these valves kind of look like half a moon, right? They kind of look like half a moon. So these are called semi-lunar valves. Semi-lunar valves in veins. Arteries do not have valves. Okay? Very simple. So again, arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. And most of them will carry oxygenated blood except pulmonary artery. While veins, which contain valves, carry blood towards the heart, and most of them carry deoxygenated blood except for pulmonary vein. And lastly, we have the capillaries. So remember capillaries, right? From a while ago, we were doing capillaries and how they're adapted for this for exchange of materials. Let's get a capillary here, and then this is a capillary, and we got these. This is a tissue, right, which has got groups of cells that are actively respiring. This capillary has a couple of adaptations. One of them is that it's very, very small, and number two, sometimes got these narrow slits in it, and thirdly, its walls are very thin, right? Just one cell thick, very, very thin walls, and it has a very large surface area. So capillaries are completely adapted for exchange of substances, exchange of materials. Again, capillaries, they have a microscopic size, which means that you have an extensive network throughout tissues for exchange. It's not like one big capillary going to one part of the tissue. These can supply every single part of a muscle, for example, or the liver, and so on. Thin walls. Capillaries have thin walls, consisting of a single layer of endothelial cells. Therefore, it will facilitate efficient and faster diffusion of substances. Remember diffusion, right? One of the things that increases the rate of diffusion is a short diffusion distance, and having one cell thick walls decreases diffusion distance. Site of exchange, where nutrients, gases, and waste products are exchanged between blood and tissues, right? So remember, oxygen was leaving, glucose was leaving, and CO2 was going in, and water was going in. So that's the function of capillaries, the point at which the exchange of materials would occur. So I have a picture for you guys here from a microscope, and in this case, you can see that you have this very big vein, for example, right? A very big lumen, and comparatively to the artery below, it's got a thinner wall. Then we've got the artery, and artery has a very thick wall. If you notice here, it's got this very thick wall, and it's got a narrower lumen as compared to the vein. Here's an arteriole, which is a very small artery, and let's try to find some capillaries here. Okay, so here is a capillary right here, if you can see it. So that's a capillary. Why is it a capillary? Because first of all, it's got these red blood cells, if you're able to notice them, and on top of this, it's got this one cell thick wall, right? It's just one cell thick wall. That is a capillary which contains these red blood cells. And next up, we have the heart. Okay, so the circulatory systems can be divided into two, the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuit, as we have looked above. Now, to be able to understand the circulatory system, we're going to start with the blood being collected from different parts of the body, right? So you could have blood that is coming from the top of the body, and that all of the blood coming from the top of the body is collected into this large vein, which is called the vena cava. Okay, so you would have a vein here, and that is called the vena cava, and that collects the blood from the top parts of the body, like the head, the face, the arms, the hands, right, the neck. And so deoxygenated blood from the top parts of the body is collected into the vena cava. Similarly, deoxygenated blood coming from the bottom parts of the body is also collected into the vena cava. Okay, so the vena cava that takes in the blood from the superior portions, the upper portions of the body, is called the superior vena cava. Okay, superior vena cava. While the vena cava that takes blood from the inferior portions of the body, such as the kidneys, the stomach, the intestines, right, the legs, that is called the inferior vena cava. So after all of this blood is collected, it is taken to the heart, right? So both the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava are going to take this blood to the heart. And the heart kind of looks like this. It's got these two portions. This is the right side of the heart. Okay, now remember the heart is a muscular organ, so what it contains is muscles in its wall throughout, okay? It's got these muscles in the wall. So deoxygenated blood that is collected from the superior portions and the inferior portions of the body comes from the vena cava into the chamber on the right. This chamber is called the right atrium, okay? The right atrium, and that is very important for you to remember. So this is called the right atrium. Now from the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood is pumped into the right ventricle through this valve. Okay, so the next chamber in the heart is the ventricle, right ventricle. The blood, as it goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, it passes through a valve here. Okay, there's a valve here that's got 3 cusps. So the valve on the right has 3 cusps. And that is called the tricuspid valve. Okay, so this is the tricuspid valve. T-R-I, cuspid, because it's got 3 cusps. Tricuspid valve. Okay, and so now what we need to do is we need to pump this deoxygenated blood to the lungs so that it can be oxygenated. So the ventricle will contract, and as the right ventricle contracts, the deoxygenated blood goes up through this blood vessel into the lungs. Okay, so let's extend this a little bit. This blood vessel eventually goes to the lung, so you'll have the lungs here. So here's the lung on the right, and then here's the lung on the left. Now what these lungs will do is that they will oxygenate the blood. Remember, deoxygenated blood is going to the lungs, and this blood is poor in oxygen and rich in carbon dioxide. While lung, it is rich in oxygen and pour in CO2. And so this blood is going to become oxygenated, right? And it will have a lot of oxygen and very less CO2. So now it has become oxygenated. And the oxygenated blood is going to return back to the heart through veins. Also, let me quickly mention the fact that the blood vessel that takes the blood to the lungs from the right ventricle, that's an artery because it is taking blood away from the heart. This is the only artery in the body that carries the oxygenated blood, and this is called the pulmonary artery, okay? So here we have the pulmonary for lung artery, the only artery that takes the oxygenated blood. It is an artery because it is taking blood away from the heart. Now, oxygenated blood will return back to the heart, and that's going to return through pulmonary veins. So lungs will give out these veins, right? And then these will merge together, and they will enter the left side of the heart. Now, the left side of the heart would look a bit similar, right? It will be a bit similar to the right side. So this oxygenated blood is returning through pulmonary veins into the left atrium. So here we have the left atrium, which is receiving oxygenated blood coming back from the lungs through pulmonary veins, right? Pulmonary vein. So the left atrium, when the left atrium contracts, it is going to push the blood into the left ventricle, okay? So into the left ventricle. Now, because we have now the oxygenated blood in the heart is supposed to pump it throughout the body, right? So we need to generate a lot of force for this blood to travel to all the tissues of the body and all the systems, the brain, the legs, all the way to the toes. And so we need to pump it really, really hard. And to be able to do this, the left ventricle, which is going to pump this oxygenated blood, will have a very thick muscular wall, okay? So the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle. All right? Remember, the right ventricle is only pumping blood to the lungs, while the left ventricle is pumping blood into the aorta, which is going to take it to the entire body. Okay? So the left ventricle will contract and push blood into the aorta. Now, as blood enters from the left atrium to the left ventricle, it also passes through a valve, and that valve is called, because it's got two cusps as I've drawn, the bicuspid valve. But more popularly and among doctors, this is referred to as the mitral valve, okay? Mitral valve. Very, very important. So the left ventricle will contract and it will push the blood into this large blood vessel that we see here. And the blood is going to go down this way. Okay? Now, this large blood vessel that comes out of the left ventricle is called the aorta, okay? Aorta. So I'm just gonna make the aorta here and extend it outside. So that's the aorta, and that's the oxygenated blood that is leaving the left ventricle. I hope you're following the arrows. Okay, aorta doesn't actually go this way. It doesn't turn to the left and then, it starts giving out branches immediately, but this is just for understanding purposes. So aorta now will, some branches of the aorta are going to go up, right? Some branches are going to go down, and then they will eventually divide into different arteries supplying to different organs. Now, apart from tricuspid and mitral valves, we also have semilunar valves in the pulmonary arteries beginnings and the aorta's beginnings. So over here, we have a semilunar valve to prevent backflow of blood. And over here, at the starting point of the aorta as well, we have a semilunar valve to prevent the backflow of the blood. Now, these are called the pulmonic and the aortic valves, respectively. So that's the pulmonic valve. And this here is the aortic valve, okay? Aortic valve. And both of them are semi-lunar valves, just like veins have. These are also similarly shaped. And yeah, so we got four valves. Now, when the aorta receives this blood from the left ventricle, it's going to divide into different branches that are going to take blood to different organs. So an example of a branch that goes to the head, you're not supposed to remember this, but I'm telling you this for general knowledge, that the artery that goes to the head, the brain, right, is called any guesses? What is the artery that takes blood to the brain? It is called the carotid artery, okay? Carotid artery takes oxygenated blood to the brain. What is the vein called that collects the blood from the brain and brings it to the superior vena cava? Well, of course, there will be a vein that collects blood from the brain and brings it all the way here to the superior vena cava. That vein is called the jugular vein, okay? Jugular vein. Jugular vein is the vein that collects blood from from the head, essentially, and brings it to the superior vena cava, okay? Now, aorta will also give branches as it goes or descends down into the body, and I want to discuss some of those branches. So we have different organs, right? For example, we have the stomach, right? We have the stomach. What other organs do we have? Just below the stomach, we have the small intestine, right? Small intestines. And we would have the kidneys, for example, right? Kidneys. And on the right side of the stomach, we also have the liver. Remember, liver. So here's the liver. Okay, so the aorta is coming from the top, and it is going to give branches to pretty much all organs. And so here's a branch that is going to the liver, right? And then it's going to descend. Here's a branch going to the stomach. Here's a branch going to the small intestines. And then here's a branch going to the kidneys. And so on. It's going to descend down all the way to the legs. So the branch that goes to the liver, you will not be questioned about this. I'm mentioning this again, but this is for general knowledge. If you want to skip this portion, I don't recommend that you skip it, but if you want to, then go ahead, okay? So the branch that goes to the liver is called the hepatic artery, okay? Hepatic artery. Hepatic artery takes oxygenated blood to the liver. Hepatic artery. The artery that goes to the stomach is called the gastric artery, okay? Gastric. Remember gastric acid, also called hydrochloric acid? Similarly, we have gastric artery that goes to the stomach. For the small intestines, we have small intestinal arteries, many of them. And for the kidneys, we have the renal artery, okay? Renal artery. And that is a little bit important because this is the artery that is going to play a role in bringing unfiltered blood to the kidneys and then leave as the renal vein, taking filtered blood away from the kidneys when we reach its own chapter. Okay, so now we will get, so these are tissues, these are organs that are made up of tissues, and so tissues are respiring, and they will take in the oxygen and give back CO2. So now they will produce deoxygenated blood that is then collected. So the liver is going to produce deoxygenated blood, right? And this will be collected, and the stomach is going to produce deoxygenated blood, and that's going to give a branch. And the small intestine is also going to give a branch, but it doesn't directly join the inferior vena cava, so I'm skipping this. Kidneys are going to give the renal vein, like I just said, and that's going to go into the inferior vena cava as well. So the liver, it gives the hepatic vein. Hepatic vein. So here we have the hepatic vein. The stomach is going to give the gastric vein. The small intestines are a little bit unique. Why? Because they don't actually give intestinal veins that directly merge with the inferior vena cava. No. What the small intestines do, remember, they were absorbing food molecules. So they give any food that is absorbed, essentially, they try to take it first to the liver. They want to take the food that is just absorbed to the liver first. Why? So that if there are any toxins in the food, the liver can detoxify them. Remember, one of the functions of the liver is to be able to detoxify toxins. So, for example, alcohol, right? Alcohol is a toxin. And so any alcohol that we drink, it's going to go to the liver first so that it can be detoxified. So there's a vein that makes a portal between the small intestine and the liver. Okay, small intestinal veins do not directly drain into the inferior vena cava. It has to go to the liver first so that any drugs or any toxins can be detoxified, and then it is allowed to return back to the systemic circuit. So there is a vein that forms a portal between the small intestine and the liver, and that is called the hepatic portal vein. Okay, hepatic portal vein. Because it forms a portal between the liver and the small intestines. And so this is going to take any of the digested food molecules. Remember, we did absorption in small intestines, like absorption of blood glucose, of glucose and amino acids, right? So all of those are also going to go to the liver first. Then the kidneys would have the renal vein, like we just said, and so on. And so eventually these will merge with the inferior vena cava, delivering blood back into the systemic circuit, which is then carried to the heart again, repeating the cycle. Okay, so that is how the circulation system works. Now, the contraction of the heart is actually stimulated by an area of special kinds of cells called the pacemaker cells in the right atrium. So right atrium has a special place here. I'm just gonna draw it in purple. So this is the space that generates an electrical impulse that spreads to the atria first, and then eventually into the ventricles, and it helps deliver this wave of contraction. So first the atria are going to contract, then it's going to delay a little bit, and then it's going to go into the ventricles, and then the ventricles will contract. So this special area that contains pacemaker cells, that's called the pacemaker of the heart. Okay, pacemaker of the heart. And scientifically, so this is the pacemaker. Scientifically, it's also called the sinoatrial node. That's the same word for the pacemaker, okay? S-A-N, sometimes as well. So pacemaker is special kinds of cells that generate an electrical impulse that spreads to the atria first, causing the atria to contract, and then after a delay, that electrical impulse is going to enter the ventricles, causing the ventricles to contract. There's also another node here. The other node is the one that receives this wave of electrical activity from the sinoatrial node, and that is the node present around here in the wall. And this node is called the atrioventricular node, okay? Atria, because it's present between the atria and the ventricles. Atrioventricular node. And the only function to atrioventricular node is that it delays the electrical impulse from directly going into the ventricles. So it delays it a little bit so that the atria can contract first, and after the delay, it's going to cause the ventricles to contract. Of course, you don't want the atria and the ventricles to contract at the same time, right? If the atria and ventricles contract at the same time, then the blood will go everywhere. But you want the blood to keep flowing from the atria to the ventricles and eventually into the arteries, like the pulmonary artery and the aorta. So atrioventricular node delays, while pacemaker generates the initial wave of electrical activity. Now, something very important, just for general knowledge as well, is that the pacemaker is determined by the nervous system, right? Nervous system is going to come in here with nerves, and it's going to determine whether the heart rate is going to be fast or slow. So if we are resting, right? If we are resting, then the nervous system is going to stimulate the pacemaker to have a slow heart rate. And when we are exercising or we are under some sort of stress, right? Then we're going to have a fast. heart rate. Okay, very easy. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that is the double circulatory system, and that's how it works. That is the heart, and these are the parts of the heart, like the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve, what's called the mitral valve, the aortic and pulmonary valves, right? The pulmonary artery, the pulmonary veins, and so on, and the aorta, which I forgot to mention here. So that's the aorta, which is the artery that leaves the left ventricle and eventually takes different branches to the brain, the liver, and so on. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into some neat notes. So structure and function of the heart. Heart has 4 chambers, as we've looked. The heart receives deoxygenated blood from the superior and inferior vena cava, superior from the top portion and inferior from the bottom portion of the body into the right atrium. Then the right atria contract, and it is actually the pacemaker that stimulates the atria to contract, and this allows the blood to flow through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. The right ventricle then contracts once the wave of electrical activity, after being delayed by the atrioventricular node, eventually reaches the ventricles. Then the ventricles contract, right? So the right ventricle contracts, pushes the blood, pushes the deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery, and then which eventually goes into the lungs. In the lungs, again, gas exchange will occur and blood is oxygenated. Now, oxygenated blood is collected in the pulmonary vein, which is going to return it back to the heart's left atrium. It is a vein because it is delivering blood to the heart. Even though it is carrying oxygenated blood, it is delivering blood to the heart, so it's a vein. Left atrium will then contract to push the blood to the mitral valve into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle contracts to push the blood through the aortic valve into the aorta, which divides into branches to supply blood to all systems of the body. Okay? Very, very simple. So again, all the branches that I taught you probably never going to show up on the exam. Here, right, looks like the heart. So here we have the superior vena cava, right, the inferior vena cava, that's the right atrium, and eventually it's going to go into the right ventricle, and then through here, that's going to go into the lungs. On the left side, as we can see, this is blood coming in to the left atrium, and then it's going to go into the left ventricle, and then as this contracts, that's going to push blood into this aorta, this large blood vessel, and it's giving off these branches, going down, giving branches, and so on. So that's the aorta. And that is how the heart works. So heart walls, these are made up of cardiac muscle. We've already finished cardiac muscle as a tissue. Now heart walls are made up of cardiac muscle, and these are electrically excitable. So when they are electrically excited, they contract and pump blood, which is done by the pacemaker. The scientific word for the pacemaker is the sinoatrial node, and this is present in the right atrium, right? Pacemaker supplied by both nerves, sympathetic nerves to increase the heart rate, and parasympathetic nerves to decrease the heart rate. This is a little bit extra as compared to the AQA syllabus. These words are not mentioned in AQA, although mentioned in other boards. So sympathetic nervous system is the one that helps us in stress situations. For example, we are alone at night and some guy is chasing us, right? That's a very stressful situation, and the sympathetic nervous system will be activated, probably release some adrenaline as well, and so on. But if we're sitting on our sofa and really not doing anything, just watching TV, rest and digest mode, then that is parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system also is called the fight or flight nervous system, right? If you're trying to fight, or if you're trying to get the hell out of there, right? Flight, then that is sympathetic nervous system. And parasympathetic nervous system would be rest and digest system, which will decrease the heart rate. Now, because heart is a muscle, it also needs oxygen and glucose. So just like all the other organs, like the legs and the arms and the liver and so on, they needed oxygen and glucose. The heart is also a muscle, right? It's made up of cardiac muscle tissue. So it also needs, and that's very important, oxygen and glucose. And so heart has its own blood supply as well, that supplies its own muscles. And that is supplied by coronary arteries. So the arteries that go to the heart are coronary arteries. Maybe you can go back to our drawing there and maybe make some coronary arteries here as well. So I'm just gonna I'm just going to make it on top of this. So here's some branches that are coming off, and they're supplying the heart itself, okay, throughout the heart. And these are coronary arteries, which are supplying the heart muscle. Now, the importance of coronary arteries for AQA, at least, is that it helps you understand coronary artery disease. You see this heart diagram here, right? This is the same diagram, they've just closed it back, right? Earlier it was opened. So you see these blood vessels that are surrounding the heart muscle? These are coronary blood vessels, so coronary arteries and coronary veins. The red ones are coronary arteries, and the blue ones are coronary veins. And these are supplying the heart muscle. Now sometimes what can occur is that if somebody is quite aged, right, or somebody has a poor diet, like a very cholesterol-rich diet, then these blood vessels are very prone to be blocked by a fatty plaque. So they can get blocked here. And if they get blocked, then the blood, do you think the blood will be able to come to the heart wall? Do you think the heart wall will be able to receive glucose and amino acids and oxygen? No, right? So if the heart muscle cannot receive glucose and oxygen, it's going to start hurting, it's going to start dying, right? The cells are going to start dying. And that is the occurrence of the coronary heart disease. So that takes us to the next topic. But anyways, here's a meme. So remember, the heart is pumping blood to its own muscles by the coronary arteries. It's kind of like a heart, right? Reborning itself. Okay, so coronary heart disease. In coronary heart disease, what happens here is that the coronary arteries in the heart become narrow due to fat and cholesterol deposits inside the blood vessels. So these coronary arteries get blocked by these blood vessels, by the fatty plaques made up of cholesterol and lipids. And so, therefore, this causes lesser oxygen and nutrients to go into the heart muscle, which eventually will result in the heart hurting, right? That's going to result in chest pain. Very, very important sign. Maybe also, instead of pain, some people have a squeezing feeling, like a pressure. Instead of pain, they will have squeezing feeling. So these are equally likely. Either you have pain or squeezing feeling. And this usually occurs in older people who have a poor diet, or are diabetics, or have hypertension, or smokers, and so on. So what are some of the risk factors for this coronary heart disease, in which you get this chest pain and a possible heart attack if it's completely blocked? Well, the risk factors are, number one, poor diet, right? Of course, if you're eating a lot of fat and a lot of cholesterol, then there's a greater likelihood that it's going to get blocked in your coronary arteries. If you have a lack of exercise, exercise makes sure that the blood keeps running well, and it prevents any fatty plaques from building up. So lack of exercise, a sedentary lifestyle, as we say, is another risk factor. Obesity is also a risk factor, and diabetes is a risk factor, and smoking is a risk factor. Also, another risk factor, a couple of risk factors I want to mention here is age, right? Increased age would also increase the chances of this happening, and males. Okay, male is also a risk factor, being males. Okay, so what are the treatment of this? Well, obviously, if it is blocked, just like a water pipe is blocked, you can just remove the plaque, right? Or you can just dilate the pipe. So same here, what you do is you do something called PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which essentially takes a catheter inserted into a vein, and then eventually it goes into the heart and installs a stent in the place of the blockage. So what is a stent? Stents are small mesh tubes used to prop open narrowed arteries, right? These are small mesh tubes that help dilate the area in which the plaque is built up. So eventually they improve blood flow and improve the symptoms. Now they are inserted during a minimally invasive procedure called angioplasty, in which you insert a catheter into the vein, and that's going to take the stent to the area of the blockage, and you open the stent using a balloon there, and it will dilate the blood vessel. The other solution to this is a bypass surgery. This is for more severe cases. Basically, bypass surgery is an open procedure. So this is not a minimally invasive procedure, right? Unlike this one, which essentially you just insert a catheter in one of your veins and then take that catheter through scanning all the way to the coronary artery and dilate the stent there. Instead, bypass surgery would mean that you open the chest in an operation room, and what you do is you bypass the part of the blockage using a graft blood vessel. So basically what you do is you place a blood vessel over both sides of the blockage. So for example, in this case, we have the blockage here, right? Here's the blockage. So you bypass this portion. You just take a blood vessel and then you connect it all the way past the blockage. And that is called a bypass surgery, a bypass procedure. Okay? So it involves having a graft blood vessel. And this graft blood vessel is usually taken from the patient themselves to avoid any transplant rejection. Okay? Number 3, which is a preventive measure. It is not a curative measure for coronary heart disease. It is a preventive measure for preventing the fatty plaques to build up. And these are statins. So statins are drugs that are taken by people at high risks of this, which lower blood cholesterol. So if you lower blood cholesterol and lower blood lipids, you reduce the risk of fatty plaque development and therefore coronary heart disease. Okay? Here. My concerned friend, food won't fill the void in your heart. Me, a person of science. Okay, here's a fat phobic artery, and here's a body positivity artery. Okay, another kind of condition that we can have is, apart from coronary heart disease, in which we get a blockage of coronary blood vessels, we can also get damaged heart valves. Right? Heart valves can also be damaged, and these can be damaged by infection. They can be damaged by heart attacks due to age-related wear or tear, or even birth defects. So there's two basically things to it. Either the valve can become too loose and leaky, right? Like the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve. And when it becomes leaky, blood starts flowing backwards, and we call that regurgitation, right? Aortic regurgitation, mitral regurgitation, tricuspid regurgitation. So all of these are essentially leaky valves that allow the blood to flow back against the valve. Now, when a valve becomes too narrow, that is called stenosis. Okay, so for example, aortic stenosis, very common in older individuals, mitral stenosis, and so on. So that's when it becomes more difficult for the blood to flow through it instead of leaking back. So what is the treatment for damaged heart valves? Well, surgery to repair a valve, surgery to replace a valve. So either you can repair the valve or you can replace the valve. Now, when you're replacing the valves, you can either derive the valves from animals, and those are called biological valves, or you can derive the valves from industry artificially, and that is called a mechanical valve. But whenever you take these valves, there's an additional risk of developing clots on top of these valves. So you have to take anti-blood clot medication to prevent clots from building up on these valves. And on top of this, especially if you have a biological valve, then there's a chance that the biological valve can be rejected by the human immune system. Remember the white blood cells, right? They identify the foreign antigens and then attack cells that have foreign antigens. So if the valve is not the perfect match, the white blood cells can think of the valve as a foreign entity and start attacking it. So we have to take immunosuppressant medications to reduce chances of transplant rejection. We want to suppress our immune system a little bit. So that's a little bit of a disadvantage, because decreasing the efficacy of immune system would result in increased risks of infections. And next up, we have heart transplants. So heart transplants usually occur when a heart is failing. Heart failure can occur due to a range of different causes. Almost always occurs in old age, by the way. So if you're a young person, it's pretty much never gonna occur, okay? There's barely any chance. Now, if you Google this, Google might tell you, that there is a slight chance and heart failure can occur at any age, but really in hospitals, we almost never see any patient who are young and have this. A failing heart needs to be replaced on a heart transplant. Before a donor is found, the patient is put on either medications or artificial heart. So an artificial heart is a mechanical heart that is made of metal and plastics. And basically what you do is you put the artificial heart in the person who is awaiting a transplant, right? If you don't have a donor for now, you place them on an artificial heart. And this is not a permanent solution. People can live on artificial hearts for only a limited amount of time until they need a real heart. Now, the advantage to this is that this has lesser chance of rejection and is readily available all the time, right? However, it doesn't function as well as a normal heart, and it has a greater chance of developing infection and blood clots. But once you get a natural donor heart, that will be the best solution. And again, it has a chance of rejection, but it's very difficult to find a matching donor, which would have the same antigens, the same blood groups as the patient. So usually a person receiving transplant is started on, again, those two drugs. Number 1, immunosuppressants to prevent transplant rejection. Number 2, anti-blood clot medication to prevent any risks of clots being developed on artificial or natural valves or some additional things that I've mentioned or added here is the blood loss. Blood loss, if there's too much blood loss, that can lead to organs not getting sufficient oxygen and nutrients, and that is called a shock, right? So, for example, somebody loses a lot of blood in a trauma or in an accident. That's called hypovolemic shock. Remember, hypo is low and volemic is volume, so low blood volume shock. So they would not be getting sufficient oxygen, nutrients, and the person can easily go into coma or even die, right? So in such cases, basically what you do is you rapidly infuse a lot of fluids to very rapidly perfuse areas where blood is not able to reach. Okay, this is an extra thing that I've added. Blood transfusions can also be done after saline infusion, which provides the body with the lost red blood cells. Now, we have 4 different blood groups, A, B, and O, but I've covered them in a different chapter, okay? But that didn't prevent me from adding a meme onto it. So here, we have 4 different blood groups, right? Asian parents when their child has a type B blood group. Okay, and that concludes this particular section. So I hope you guys can review this. And I really hope that you guys can make the drawings, make the notes, and hopefully get full marks when you see questions on this. Make me proud. Okay, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. You can buy these notes by contacting through the WhatsApp link provided below, and to get private coaching for your specific needs, you can contact us right now using the WhatsApp link below. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.